Hello and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed and we are reading the Phaedo because we are learning the greatest art that Socrates has left for us to learn. The archetype of all arts. The thing that we need to do here to reach our destiny and understand and solve problems. Free ourselves from the chains of fate, as it is said. Thank you for joining me in the chat. Thank you for sharing your insights and your words and your questions. Really nice stuff. Those who are listening, you are welcome to join on chat. There should be a link below this video if you're watching this on YouTube. You can also support on YouTube and on Patreon if you like, and join the Discord. The text as well is free and accessible below. So, what are we doing now? Where are we in the text? We're quite a few pages through. We're quite a few episodes into the series here. And we are going from, along the way, Socrates has given us his doctrine of philosophy. He's dropped a bunch of key terms, many of which we are unfamiliar with. Even experts in Plato, experts in Socrates, experts in philosophy itself will not be familiar with these, simply put, because we don't have a word for these in English. And we are at the tail end of a tradition where we don't even have the required word to do metaphysics. We are in the tradition of the Romans, the Latin tradition, where they do not have the word "the," and therefore they do not have a culture of asking the question, what is the justice? What is the beautiful? They only look for the particulars, the adjectives. What is a beautiful thing? What is a example of justice? This, of course, is our lineage. It can be traced all the way back to Aristotle. People who look to the world of becoming, the physical world that we can perceive through our physical senses. Okay, it's not our senses that are perceiving, we are perceiving through them. And so we see a kind of playing out, which in philosophy we recognize must have a cause. And of course, Aristotle in that tradition, categorizing things in the physical world, giving us the different categories of things you can learn at school, different ways of classifying physical things into different categories, but missing the big question, why are they the way that they are? Why are we the way that we are? Where did we come from? Where are we going? And of course, the way to answer those questions is to get into causes. What's the cause? Why are we here? Another way of asking that. So you can translate the who, what, why, where, when, how questions into what questions. For example, why are we here? That translation into a what question is, what is the cause for us being here? So we're looking at causes. So we have to learn something new. We have to create a new culture. We have to introduce new words. And of course, this understanding, I encourage you to apply to your own experience. When you were in school, was it only things in the physical world that you were looking at? When you looked at cause, was it only physical causes? Was mind understood in itself? Not how we can perceive it, its effects in the physical world. So mixing cause and effect, mixing the dry with the wet. And of course, we know that there are certain keywords that are foundational, necessary in philosophy that we are able to read now because we have a more accurate translation, a necessary translation, so we can get the necessary words that are not only absent from our culture, and therefore we have to go back and pick up where we left off, pick up what Socrates was laying down, Just like maybe as you grow into an adult, you realize that you left your passions behind, or you left an instrument that you were interested in learning behind, or you left some sort of love behind, and you go through some sort of reflection, or ideally philosophical midwifery, or some sort of counseling or therapy, and you pick up where you left off. We are doing that for our human golden age, the golden age of Socrates, our spiritual and intellectual tradition, heritage, birthright. That's what we're picking up. And so Socrates gave us his doctrine. This is what it means to do philosophy and live the philosophical way and be just, and why it's important for you in this life, and most importantly for your incarnation. Because compared to eternity, this lifetime is very short. So we're here to do something, and part of that is preparing for our next reincarnation, or ideally to reincarnate to a higher level, which some might call escaping the cycles of death and rebirth, life and rebirth, or escaping the cycles of physical reincarnations. So that's a lot there. That's a very different way of understanding philosophy compared to what we are given today by experts in the field, where they say, oh, it's not about this, it's about opinions, it's about creating your own worldview, it's about convincing other people, winning arguments, all these sorts of different things that Socrates identified in the text we're reading. This is what's going to pass as wisdom and understanding, if you don't really understand what I'm leaving you, if you don't understand what philosophy really is. And what is philosophy? According to what Socrates is leaving us, the art and practice of death and dying. Wow.
Wow. Wow.
Now, he says that doesn't mean your final death. It's something that we need to practice. Get accustomed to separating our soul from our physical body, collecting ourselves together, doing some sort of activity, not flying around the room or whatever people might possibly experience. And in fact, that separation from the chains and the binds of our body frees us up to do philosophy even better, which is a big question, because hey, if philosophy is some sort of separating the soul of the body, it doesn't just stop there. So Socrates gives us more specifics. He talks about dianoia. He talks about this is how we do it, dianoia. Most accurately defining each of the self ideas themselves, not as the adjectives in our physical world, not through any of our senses, not as a, but the. Defining them most accurately, as far separated from your physical senses as you can be. So that would be using the ideas and the understanding we're gaining from this text in our reading. That's dianoia, and that is a kind of purification of ourselves, of our soul. And that affords us to experience, or prepares us for the experience, or makes us ready for the invitation from the more divine part of ourselves into noesis, nous. Okay, so dianoia, nous, these are two words that we don't have an English equivalent for. So we have to pick up the language of the Greeks. So we're gaining an understanding of the specifics. It's fine to start with trusting Socrates when he says that philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying. So philosophers seek and deserve death most of all people. Not in the way that the many would understand. The many people think that philosophers are the ones that deserve to die because they're useless. Look at them, they're not even making money. What a waste of space, right? But in a higher sense, because they are living in the best possible way, and secondarily giving the greatest possible benefit. Okay, so we can start with trusting, but we have to develop our own understanding of how and why that's the case. What are the causes? What are the parts? How does it fit together? Why must this be necessarily so? And why do the other theories of philosophy fall down? When we push the implications or follow the consequences of what follows of other definitions, why do they not harmonize with the other things that we see? Why do they have a self-contradiction? Why are they discordant? And so why does Socrates' definition of philosophy, why does that fit best? Why is it sufficient, beautiful, and necessary, and harmonious with all the things that we have been learning and reading? So that process of going from trust to our own seeing of how and why it works is our movement from trust to dianoia. A kind of understanding applied to that which is most important, the metaphysical, the realm of being. What we're understanding is not how many jelly beans there are in China, or how many, fruit bats migrate in the winter. We're understanding the nature of our soul, the nature of art, the nature of understanding itself. These sort of things, the sorts of things that are knowable, because they have their own eternal, immortal existence as a kind of model or paradigm in that realm that is apprehended through noesis. So what are we talking about? We're talking about different levels of cognitive functions, different ways of using our mind, not our brain. Notice that was Simius's idea of the soul, that we're just a byproduct of our brain. Notice an Aristotelian language, or a language of materialism. Our thoughts is just our brain. There is no soul or mind, because the brain is physical. You can poke it with your physical fingers and sense it with your physical senses. But we're specifically talking about non-physical senses, non-physical ways of apprehending. Right? Some we're kind of familiar with, like understanding or dianoia. Yeah, we use understanding. We can think with concepts and ideas, which is very close to dianoia, which is similar, except it's a different class of ideas that have their own existence in the Greek word idea, because they exist in the realm of being, or the metaphysical world, some people call it, or the fourth dimension. So we're somewhat familiar with what dianoia is, but it's a little bit different in those ways, but also noesis. A different kind of sense that can sense not the physical world, but the metaphysical world. In the same way, you can't see sound. It's a different set of things. You can't hear sight. Likewise, you can't see noesis, being. You can't see the selves in being, beauty itself, justice itself. You can't see it with your physical eyes. You can't hear it. But we can have knowledge. There is such a thing as knowledge. A different sense. Now, sometimes we talk about the word ousia, the organ of the soul, the eye of the soul that can apprehend through nous. In that cognitive function we call nous. Why? Because it's the same nature. And that was one of the things we've read in the Phaedo, that all of these beings, thumbs up, all of these beings were interested in understanding and knowing. Notice, verifying our understanding in knowing. like what is the beautiful, what is the justice. All of these things have their own hyparxis, are all aspects of the same thing. If you get to the top of that mountain, that has the same fullest flowering or apex. That's called self-ousia in the text. Now, self, one of the words that are not translated up until now. Very important.
Wow.
And ousia, one of the words not translated. In other words, we can understand why learning philosophy is a new game. That can only be done pretty much now. Since Socrates. Because these key words, not translated, not taught at school. And both of them are needed to understand the nature of this thing we're after. If we want to know causes, what's the highest cause of the causes? What's the highest apex? What's the nature of the causes? Oh, it's self-ousia. But how do you say that if you don't have the language? This is where we're at. So this applies to things that exist, and the fancy philosophy word for that is ontology, from the word ontos, which means being, what exists in being, and ology is study of. And also what we're talking about today is the different ways we can apprehend things. What tools do we have up here? Not up here, it's a physical metaphor. In here, our mind, our consciousness, our soul. How do we apprehend? So if ontology is what exists, ontos, ology, epistemology is from the word epistos, which we know is tied to knowledge, is how we know things. How do we know things? So what is ontology? How do we know what is epistemology? And that's just some fancy words in case you come across, you want to have a talk about this with your friends and they're throwing around some big fancy words to make their argument sound more important or whatever. You can throw in those two big words too. Or when they throw them out, you can nod and go, oh yes, you're talking about what exists. Or you're talking about cognitive functions. So, we are going from the cognitive function of trust. And we saw why trust is important. There are many ways in which we relate to the logos. This is another word that's not translated, but is probably the most fundamental word. If there is a way of understanding reality, what is that thing that we're understanding? That's the logos. If there is a pattern that is understandable, that permeates all reality, that is the paradigm or the archetypal system. What is that? That's the logos. If there is a journey to reach our highest understanding, our highest cognitive functions, our highest spiritual states of mind, to reach our destiny, what is the name of that path? The logos. How do we relate to the logos? Well, Socrates calls it in. He's following the logos. He's guided by the logos. He watches the logos even if he's the one talking, which is a fascinating thing to think about. So there are all these different ways that we can pull out from the text of relating to the logos. And Socrates is saying that's the activity. Pull out the key terms. Organize them into a structure. Learn that structure. The name for that structure is the dialectic. And this is a way of moving from just trust to your own dianoia, to your own understanding with a capital U. Unifying it together. And what was the word? We did this earlier in an earlier episode, and we collected all those key terms. calling it in, trusting it, watching it, giving it time to surface, I think was one of them. Receiving the logos. These are all ways that we can relate to the logos, which is what we want to do, because that should be one of the questions in the text is, who should be ruling? What should be ruling in your soul? And Socrates, who is he listening to? Because he said, hey, we are here under the rulership or mastership of someone else, of the gods. That's why we shouldn't end our life before our time. It's not our choice to make. We're on a tour of duty. We're serving something higher. And of course, in that, if we do our work here, we can go into that higher realm. Socrates is saying where he is headed to, where we will find even greater men and gods and masters than we find here. No, thumbs up. So, mastership is one of the questions. What are the conditions for mastership? Who should we be listening to? What should be ruling us? Well, one of the key things, one of the key puzzles is that one that we've been carrying with us. And one of the possible hypotheses or answers to that question seems to be the logos. That seems to be what we're calling in. That seems to be what's guiding us. That seems to be what is our master in this text. So how do we relate to the logos? We do our little dialectic. Little is diminishing it. Do our special important dialectic.
You're a wizard, Harry.
And unify all those terms, following it, calling it in, watching it. And to do all those things, you must necessarily have to trust it. Trust the logos was one of the things that Socrates says we have to do. And for us, at that particular time, that word trust incorporates or unifies or synthesizes all of those different divisions, all of those different ways that we've been relating to the logos in the text. They all need trust. So we've got to trust the logos before we can follow the logos. So that was an important insight and a kind of leveling up for us. It's a kind of growth, yeah. So we've discovered something. Hey, this doctrine of philosophy, the art and practice of death and dying, and how important it is and all these things that we're learning. We need to trust the logos to do that. Interesting. Which also means we have to learn about the logos, discover the logos, but once we can discover it, we need to trust it so we can be guided by it, so we can follow it. Of course, in our reading, as soon as we came to that conclusion, coincidentally enough, Socrates comes in and says, hey, dudes, good work, but you can't stop at trust. There are problems that can happen. In fact, the greatest defects of the soul can happen if you just trust only. Of course, mythologized in the villain's origin story, you end up being convinced by arguments that sound true and attractive or seem probable, and then you end up distrusting people that you once trusted, but as a metaphor, as a myth, and you end up hating people. So that's a myth for, well, if you just trust the logos and one of those people who sound smart and are good at debating or good at arguing or are good at the word in the text, anti-logos, haters or contradictors, like, yeah, you turn on any mainstream news network and the pundits, the mouthpieces for the status quo, that's pretty much all they do. They just shut down anybody. Look at me, I'm just contradicting you, and that makes me smart. And it also keeps the status quo the way it is because there's no change if we just reject every understanding, every logos. So if you grow up in that kind of a world, like most of us do today, you might end up hating the logos. I hate understanding. No talk of politics, no talk of religion or spirituality at the dinner table. Why? Because I hate to understand things. In fact, there might not even be an understanding in reality. Rejecting understanding or hating the logos, rejecting the understandable nature of reality, number 2, and of course, rejecting the art. Therefore, we can't fix things. There is no art. Of course, we wouldn't reject the art of medicine. But for some reason, understanding what's best for our soul, that gets rejected. So collectively, that would be politics. Individually, that would be spirituality. How to correct our course would be the justice system. How to learn what we need to know would be education system. All of these things. But mainly politics and spirituality. The things that we are told we shouldn't talk about. So the anti-logos people who claim to be wise because they can shut down and hate the logos, teach what is false about reality, that it is not knowable or understanding, there is no realm of being, and of course reject the art. Therefore, there is no art of spirituality or art of governance. Therefore, let anybody rule us. Let any 100 different religions exist. And let them, exploit and destroy people. Who cares? So therefore, we can't just trust, because these people will come along and they'll know what buttons to push, because that's the biggest industry in the world, marketing, figuring out how to manipulate people for your own personal interests based on your own personal opinions, or really the ones with the power. So because of this, you might, if you start by trusting the arguments that Socrates is putting forward, but then these jokers come along, which is our world, then you might believe them and feel betrayed by the logos, especially what you thought you understood previously. You might end up distrusting yourself too as the judge. So this is the worst condition of the soul. You might end up hating and reviling, in Socrates' words, the logos. And why is that such a big deal? You won't get to truth and being, which is what we're here for. So that was also not just, so Socrates was giving us the negative. This is the problem. But we are learning that part of the puzzle solving is the video game maker, or in this case, the movie maker, or in this case, Socrates, the speaker, will give us the negative so you can work out for yourself the positive, allowing you to participate, you to use your mind, allowing you to figure out some questions. So if the reason it's the greatest problem is you won't reach truth and being, then we can think for ourselves and go, hang on a second. That means the way to truth and being is the logos. So the greatest defect of the soul, distrusting, hating, and reviling the logos, the opposite must be which means you won't get truth or being. The opposite must be true also. If you do trust and you love, if you in the opposite of distrust, trust. If you opposite of hate, love. Opposite of what was the other one? Despise. You seek. So if you trust, love, and seek, want, desire the logos, then you can reach truth and being. So it's our own understanding now. We had to put it together. We had to solve the puzzle. This is what reading is: solving puzzles, discovering puzzles, and solving them. It's learning. So, logos is big. One of those words that isn't translated. Mistranslated different ways. Some texts will say, oh, it's reasoning. Some texts will say it's, and then later on, the same word logos will be translated as reason, principle, and then the same word logos will be translated in the same text as speech or dialogue. It's all over the shop. So all of those specific variations or divisions of the use of the word is missed if they're translating the word differently all over the show. Why is that important? Because we need to collect together all those divisions as part of the problem-solving journey. We need to collect the clues. If there's nothing to indicate, oh, this is a clue over here, because the translator is playing fast and loose with his translation, because he doesn't know what it means to read, because it's been buried since Socrates, then we are going to miss the point. We are going to miss the mark. We can't accept what Socrates is giving us, the art of the logos. Fortunately, that's what we're doing. We can do it. So we recognize, oh, and by the way, there is a name for that. The different applications of the same word in various contexts. That's called division. That's one of the four, there's only four. So simple. Four parts or categories of the dialectic. Definition, demonstration, division. That's part of it. And where do you go after you have all the divisions? Synthesis. You've got to synthesize it together. And the other half of synthesis is analysis. So it's SA together, synthesis, analysis. So you synthesize it together, you unify it together. And then analysis means you take it back to the start, take it back to the definition. And you've understood what was there the whole time in a new way. Turning upon yourself, which is like ousia. Another one of those words that we can only have now because of translations and human history and the institutions that we live in now. But we can understand why. Notice we're not trusting only Socrates saying, oh, by the way, if there's no philosophy, these people will come and claim to be the ones who are wise and have understanding. We could trust him. And he's true, he's right, he hit the nail on the head, definitely. But we want to understand why these lovers of opinion, philodoxia, lovers of contention, philonikos, anti-logos people, haters, contradictors, people who reject a realm of being, reject and understand a universal understanding called the logos, and reject an art, balloons. Yeah, he's absolutely right. That's literally our world today. He did mention he had the art of prophecy, but it might not even be prophecy. It might just be when you can see it, when you can understand it, it's obvious. Like anything you've learned to understand. Hey, if you are reading a language you don't understand, it's going to be confusing. But if it's in English, if you're an English speaker, yeah, of course, it's obvious. I see through my understanding. It's obvious. So, while it's obvious for Socrates, we want that ourselves. We want to accept that quest and level up ourselves. Accepting the quest noise. We want to see it obviously. And of course, Socrates is saying this is imperative. This is most important for you to do. So we can't just trust what he's saying. This is the world that you will live in, and the cause of war, civil discord, human strife and ills. Even though he's right, we can't just trust him. We want to see why it's the case. Why it necessarily has to be that way. What are the causes and the divisions? Once you understand the cause, you can understand how it affects not just war, but our justice system, our education system, YouTube. Why is that all based on contention and almost nobody talking about the logos, talking about being logos and the art? In other words, once it's yours, you can divide it up, see it in many different areas, see it everywhere. So whether it's understanding the cause, the nature of problems, or understanding the nature of our soul, we have to move, and ontology, understanding being, we need to level up our epistemology. We need to level up the way we think from trust to dianoia. And that is the self-study and exercise of philosophy, as Socrates calls it. Doing philosophy in the right way. It's also the one true mystical or spiritual tradition. All the others are people who carry staffs. Hey, we're not saying they haven't had an insight or two. But this is the tradition. This is the art. You need to understand it. You need the logos. And that's what we're doing in the text. We're leveling up our epistemology. We're leveling up our cognitive faculties. We're going from trust in all of these different things. Trusting that the world is going to be like this. That these people claiming to be experts are these lovers of fighting, lovers of opinion, and lovers of contention, anti-logos people who are actually motivated by riches and fame because they're not in philosophy, they're in love of the body. Yeah, it makes sense, but we need to understand it for ourselves. So too, the nature of the soul, we need to understand it for ourselves. But not only that, if there is an understanding, that can be applied to understanding our problems, that can be applied to understanding our politics, that can be applied to understanding spirituality, that can be applied to understanding our soul. 4 divisions that equally can have understanding or dianoia applied to it. Therefore, we want to, synthesis, look to the most important thing of those divisions, the most causal understanding. We want to therefore understand understanding. Dianoia. And we've been getting clues about this. Beautiful things are beautiful by participating in the beautiful. Greatness is great because of greatness itself. We want to dianoia-ing through the activity of dianoia. So you want to gain a dianoia of dianoia through dianoia. He's been dropping us hints. What is understanding? Hey, if that's how we separate our soul from the body, if that's what is purification, if that's what makes spirituality true spirituality, if that is what is fundamentally lacking for our world and from our world and the cause of our problems, if that is the unification of logos and dialectic, both of which we need to follow, not just trust, but understand dianoia. If this is necessary for art, and he says we need the art of the logos, not just the trust of the logos, we need the art of the logos. We want to understand understanding. Dianoia-ing. And he said, I'm going to show you how to do it. If you follow me, you have to grant me a few things first of all. You have to grant that the beings exist. Because you have to grant they exist to go from trust to dianoia so that dianoia can allow you access to it. In other words, dianoia has to precede nous. Ultimately, we want to get to the realm of being. We want to perceive it through that cognitive function of ousia and nous. We want to separate ourselves from the body, to experience that which is eternal, immortal, indestructible, and most real. But dianoia is our method. So you have to grant Socrates that they exist temporarily so you can develop your dianoia and then confirm it. So we can say, oh, this is why we have our problems, because experts, TV, school, news, in positions of power, reject even existence, so you can't even start dianoia. You can only stay at the level of opinion. And then those who can manipulate popular opinion, they're the ones in charge. And that's what we're seeing. At the time of recording, there's this debate in American politics between Biden and Trump. And nobody is asking who has the art. Nobody is asking what's their highest vision and their understanding, and if they can use it to benefit. All they're asking is, how well can they manipulate popular opinion to get people to vote for them? That's the only thing I've ever seen being asked about this. what is the lesser of two evils, and then how can they manipulate opinions, get people to join their team, group thinking, the barbarian way of thinking. Inside my cave good, other caves bad and scary. Again, this is just a cause. This is not a blame. It's not evil. It's a cause, a kind of solution needed for our evolution as human beings that makes us barbarians, and we need to evolve into reason. Whose reasoning is better? Whose dianoia is better? In fact, is there a standard so it doesn't come down to popular opinion? Because as we're learning and as we're experiencing, if you're a philosopher, if you're watching this, you've probably experienced this. Most people are going to call this empty talk or useless, quoting the text. So if you were to take a vote, what is the best thing to do? Or take a vote, what is philosophy? You'd get the exact opposite of the truth, the exact opposite of philosophy. Just like, hey, if you went to a doctor and the doctor came out, or the surgeon came out to the waiting room, said, I'm not sure whether I should make an incision above the blockage or below the blockage in my transplant. I need to take a vote. Everybody in the waiting room, who votes above? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, who votes below? Okay, 1, 4, 5, 6. Okay, interesting. Okay. If ever a doctor made with an art of medicine, if ever that happened, immediately he would be removed from power, removed from his position in an instant. And no one would blink an eye about that. Same thing with if someone was building your house and he walked out to a bunch of people who didn't have the art of architecture. All we are doing is looking at those particulars and realizing, of course, the opinions or the ignorance of many shouldn't be a standard for art. And if it is today, because we haven't learned the true art of dianoia, understanding, then we can understand why the world is in such a terrible position right now, why there is so much injustice and ignorance, why there is so much inequality and suffering and exploitation, why humanity is on the brink of extinction. It's the negative, but also we can understand what is needed to change it. Not just trust Socrates, because he's telling us, he has told us, but we need to understand it for ourselves. We need to dianoia, understand why the art of dianoia is needed. To recognize, oh, you're a spiritual guru, you need the art of dianoia applied to the soul, being, consciousness, reality. Oh, you're a politician, you need the art of dianoia applied to what benefits society, what creates the conditions for that spiritual development. Because art requires benefiting the patient. So we're learning to understand the importance of understanding. We're becoming philodianoias, lovers of dianoia. So Socrates says, okay, first grant me the beings exist. Then, if you follow along, we will get to a proof of why the soul is immortal and indestructible. And balloons. Those two things. Because those are the things that Cebes needs to see for himself. Because he already got proven. There were 4 arguments proving that the soul is immortal and goes through a cyclical process of reincarnation. Wasn't good enough because he had a particular childhood fear, a religious or mythological belief. Welcome to being human. We all get that. growing up, a false belief and mythology from our family, culture, and religion about the nature of reality and our souls. Usually based on fear to be manipulated because we're in that, barbarian tradition so far. The counterattack against Socrates. We need to become rational. Dianoia-ing. And Socrates began by asking the question that you can ask, where you at or where you're stuck? Similar question, same question. Because Socrates says, where you at on your level of development towards destiny, or where you stuck? What level of problem are you facing towards your fate? You repeat your cycles of fate until your inevitable failure, tragic failure, which is the nature of a tragic play. The tragic hero has a tragic flaw that keeps him bound to fate, tragically. So Socrates says the art is recognizing every human being is somewhere between the ideal and their problem. Somewhere in this 0 to 90 degree arc. And if you had a contest for who's completely worthless, very few people would win. Just like there are very few tiny, tiny dogs and very few really, really big dogs. Or very few perfectly beautiful people and completely ugly people. We're all somewhere between here. So where you're at or where you stuck is some question about where you are on this graph. That's where you start. And then Socrates, getting that from his person because it's a question and answer. He's not monologuing. He's not lecturing. He's not professoring the faith. He's not talking at you like politicians or media people do. It's a dialogue. It's not a debate. So where are you at? But then, is this your position? So Socrates, with the art, would be able to pull out the key terms of his logos to judge. Because part of the art is, like we just said, judging. So hey, if you trust people without judging them, you can end up hating all people because they'll let you down, because they're not trustworthy, because everyone has a problem. If you trust any logos without the art of the logos, without judging it, same thing happens, but worse, you'll end up hating the logos. So Socrates, if he has the art, should have been able to judge. Judge where he's at, and using the key terms of his art, reframe his position, restate it more clearly. The same way, if you go to a doctor, you say, oh, I've got an ouchie here, and I've got a bit of a stingy here, and my the pointy part of my arm is a bit then he would go, oh, okay, so you've got a sharp pain on your forearm, your elbow is giving you discomfort, and your shoulder is it's got a fracture, or it's got a contusion in your meniscus, or something like that. I don't know their keywords, but he would use the keywords of his art to translate what Socrates is saying into more accurate language. We call that a steelman argument. He's presenting his argument even better, opposite to people who love debating, which is called a straw man argument. You present it like a scarecrow made of straw, so you can beat it down quite easily. It's not the real argument. So where you at? Is this your argument? And by the way, that's a question. Do you want to add or subtract anything? Question. Not like the experts on whatever. They'll just tell you, oh, you think this and this is why you're wrong. No, it's a question. Is this your position? Okay, and what was the key, the position? It would be rational, intelligent to fear our death unless we can know and prove, this is a duad, that our soul is, balloons, immortal and indestructible. More balloons. Because CBs is saying, well, okay, maybe our soul lived before as a kind of immortality that allows us to learn through remembering what we once knew. even as the hyparxis. Maybe there is a hyparxis of soul where we knew the hyparxis of being, allowing us to recognize beautiful things or just things or equal things even before we learn about it. We can recognize it with our physical senses, so we're reminding ourselves. So we have to have, and we can never see beauty itself or equality itself here, so we must have necessarily seen it before, but that doesn't mean this isn't our last life. Maybe being human is a kind of sickness that wears our soul down, and this is our last incarnation. Or maybe we've had just one incarnation. We outlive many versions of our body as we grow, but hey, you don't outlive the last jacket you die wearing. The last jacket argument. So unless we can know and prove that our soul is immortal and indestructible, unless we can do that, then it would be more rational and intelligent to fear death. So the big fear that most people have and suffer from and can prevent you from getting into real philosophy. If philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying, therefore you would desire death. And that's what it means to be truly courageous. Not accepting death out of misunderstanding and fear, which is the vice version of courage, by the way, was mentioned in the text. That's what we have to do. So, where are you at? Is this your position? Pulling out the key elements that we have to do. By the way, there were two things and there were two relationships, or two ontologies and two epistemologies, loosely speaking. That the nature of what is ontology is that the soul is eternal, which is again ontos, being, and indestructible. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the nature of being itself, the nature of ontos in the Greek itself. So these are two aspects of ontology, what actually exists. That which exists is immortal and indestructible, but also two levels of epistemology. We have to know it and be able to prove it. Okay, what does it mean to know? Noesis. We have to translate it. We have to do some work. What does it mean to be able to prove it? Dianoia. We need dianoia and noesis. Those are our two cognitive functions, or epistemology, to be, if you fancy. And two levels of ontology. What does exist? Which is also the nature of our true soul, what our soul actually is in its nature. The hyparxis of soul, whether it's immortal and indestructible. Now, Socrates says if you grant that there is an ontology, that there is a being, and you follow along, then you will be able to see these. You will be able to see for yourself that the soul is immortal and indestructible. But hopefully Seebees keeps in mind, this is not just about this one argument. He should be, if he's playing, if he's in the game, learning about dianoia itself, not just using dianoia to prove this, but learning what dianoia is so he can get the art, because he was in this predicament to begin with because he just trusted the argument of the soul's immortality without the art of the logos, which we could also say is the art of dianoia. It's not just the logos, but its structure or the dialectic. There's another duad you can put together. So we've got a lot of cool duads on the table today. And hey, what do we do when we're in the game? If you see key terms and you can recognize patterns, you add them to your skill tree. So let's have some fun and create some duads for our duad skill tree. We've been working a lot on our triad skill tree. So let's jump into a duad skill tree. So this is a video game trope where as you level up your character from level 1, level 2, up the way, level 10, let's say, you get a new skill as you go. And you can pick, do you want to add your skill to swordsmanship? Do you want to add your skill to shields or defense? Do you want to add your skills to magic? It's a little magic stuff. Move this up a bit. So you can add your skill point here because I want to be a fighter, and then, but by the way, but then maybe one here. I don't want to really do defense. I just want to be a fighter and a magic person. So then next level, I'll add level 2 to magic. Level 3, I'll add to magic again. And then, by the way, what happens in these skill trees, they diverse, they go out. So it starts level 1 like this. And these are the types of magic. So this might be fire magic. This might be ice magic. Ice cube. So I want to level up my fire magic, so I go down this skill tree. This branch of my skill tree. So that's what skill trees are. That's where the idea comes from. Now, what we are doing is our skill trees are not magic and defense and fighting. It's kind of the archetype of skill trees. So level 100 maybe up here. Twos, threes, and fours. Duads, triads, and quadrads. Well, but what's interesting about what we're doing is every new one is a new branch. So we've got today we're doing duads, so let's focus on duads. So we've got So we've got a duad of ontology. Okay, so yeah, so ontology over there. Let's move this aside. So every new thing, you add a new branch to your skill tree. And then what you can do is you can rub the two together to gain new insights or understanding from the different skills. So we're doing duads. So we've got, today we're talking about epistemology. Actually, it's ontology. And epistemology. We've talked about nous and dianoia. N-O-I-A. We've talked about we've got a lot today of these. You could say definition and demonstration. We've also talked about logos, and so, and that's a question, which one goes where? Does logos go here and dialectic go here? Not sure. All of these are hairs. Talked about dialectic and logos. Logos going together as dianoia. but dianoia going together with nous. Actually, dianoia leads to nous. So this would be maybe the lesser of the two. Dianoia leads to nous. Maybe. These are all questions, by the way. It might turn out that, hey, dianoia might lead you to nous, but in the experience of nous, you can still apply dianoia to go beyond nous. So maybe dianoia is actually more significant. Maybe. It's a question. It's good to have questions. That's what we're doing. Epistemology, how we think, and ontology, the things that we apply our cognitive functions to. So there's probably more that we mentioned today. And this is important to do because this is how we go from trust to understanding. Epistemology. All right, so Socrates starts by saying, hey, number one, wait, let's write that down too, because if we're noticing structure in how he's asking his question, then that's what we want to find out. We don't just want to learn about the soul, we want to learn about how to think. We want to dianoia. And hopefully we want to be doing that through practicing our own dianoia, which is an interesting triad. So we can say, hey, that's a triad, which is this skill tree. Hey, you got a triad of dianoia in dianoia through dianoia, or developing our dianoia of dianoia through the activity of dianoia. By the way, he also said beautiful things get their beauty through participating in beauty. Greatness is great because of the idea of greatness. He's already given us these kinds. He's given us a couple already. So which is a kind of clue. He actually has given us two, which is enough for a pattern. So we're also learning how we can implant patterns in our own use of the art. Give two examples, that's enough to establish a pattern. Let the other person play. Okay, so we're interested in dianoia through to dianoia. Socrates asked, okay, number one, where are you at or stuck? Number two, refine. CB's. Can you spell it? CB's position through Soc's art. Oh, okay. So this is also a judge. We said it's important to judge. Judge using the art where they are based on this, which is another dyad, by the way. Where you at, where you're stuck, where you at, up here, and where you're stuck. Another dyad. Add it to your list, so you'll be somewhere here. You got to judge. Okay. Refine. And also as a question. That's important too. Do you want to add or subtract anything? So as a question. These are some opening stages. We want to understand this art. What are the parts? Okay, and whoops. And Socrates said, if you follow along, you will get to see the nature of your problem. Oh, and here's some more duads. You will be able to know and prove, maybe nous and dianoia, that the soul is immortal and indestructible. Maybe that's a duad. Keep it. See if it plans out. Okay, and we just finished the argument of why the soul must be immortal last time. And it was based on the idea of while things move from opposites in our physical world, in the realm of being, that can't happen. The odd can never be even. In fact, we used that earlier to look at sticks. Equality will never be inequality. So as soon as you bring in this one idea of greatness, the other idea of smallness will withdraw or perish. Is that another duad? Interesting. Balloons. So the other one will withdraw or perish. Okay, and what about things that don't have opposites, like 3? There's no opposite of 3. So this also applies to those you bring with you. 3 necessarily brings with it the idea of oddness. So in the same way, odd will withdraw or be destroyed if you bring in evenness, so too will 3 withdraw or be destroyed if you bring in evenness. Not because it's the opposite of 3, but it's the opposite it brings of that which it brings in with it necessarily. Therefore, what brings life to bodies? Soul. What's the opposite of life? Death. So if life can't sustain death, what do we call that? Deathless? No. Undeath? No. Undead? No. Immortal. So the uneven is that which can't be even. The immortal is that which can't be dead. So if life is therefore can't be dead, and the soul is what brings in life to the body, therefore the soul itself will withdraw or perish in the presence of death, and therefore the soul must be immortal. Sound good? So we don't just want to be, we don't want this to be a warm bath. A warm bath makes you feel nice, makes you feel good for a little while, and then you get cold again. And then you can get addicted to the bath. We want it for ourselves forever. We want our dianoia to be immortal and indestructible. Interesting. Curious, isn't it? We want our understanding of the immortality in the soul itself to be immortal and indestructible, so that when someone else comes along with the anti-logos and is very good at shooting you down, a hater or a contradictor or a debater, we are not going to lose our dianoia of the soul, or our dianoia of dianoia, or our art. Our art has to be immortal and indestructible, just like the soul. So whatever is necessarily immortal and indestructible, we need to make sure that our understanding and our art is also bringing that with us. The same way the soul brings in immortality, we want our art to bring in immortality and indestructibleness. What does that mean? That means that while we are being given the reasoning to show it for the soul being immortal, we need to be looking for the key parts of that argument. Because now he's going to do a different one, that the soul is indestructible. We need to look for, first of all, we can enjoy the argument and be convinced that our soul is indestructible, but we also need to, because we're doing a dianoia of dianoiaing, that's our ticket. It's through dianoia that we can do philosophy properly, to separate from the body, to be purified for our incarnation and our death, to reach phronesis, to reach being. That's dianoia. We need to also be looking for the key parts of his reasoning. What is the key terms and the structure of the argument itself. Okay, so now we've got key terms and structure of the soul's immortality. In that argument, the key terms and structures, let's draw it. So we're gaining the activity that we've been learning all the way through, looking for key terms, looking for structure, looking for patterns, repetition, part of patterns, I guess. We need to apply this to the argument, or logos, we should say, the logos for the immortality of the soul, and also this one, for the logos for the indestructible ity of the soul. Okay, so what do we get when we have that? Well, that gives us 1, that gives us 2. What did we just say that's enough for? 2 examples or 2 particulars is enough to establish a pattern from which we can infer or hypothesize the cause or the principle that causes it. Okay, which is very similar to everything we've been doing in philosophy. Why? Here are some key terms or structure, patterns, elements for beauty. Hey, this is a really beautiful woman. What makes her? Is there some harmony in her physical appearance? Is there some key terms? Eyes, ears, nose, that all have to be there. She'd be slightly less beautiful if she was missing an eye and an ear, right? Is there a structure and pattern? Is there some symmetry? Is there some balance? Is there some repetition? Is there a balance repeated in the top in a similar way that's reflected in the other elements? A repeating theme? I should put that theme. Which is, so a lot of these words have overlap. Yeah. Like a repeating structure and a pattern could be a theme. Okay. Oh, by the way, here is a second beautiful thing. Not a beautiful person, but a beautiful painting. Are there some key terms? Is there a structure? Is there some patterns? Is there some symmetry, some balance, some order, some flow, some proportion in the painting? In other words, 1 example of beauty, 2 examples of beauty, that's enough to answer the question, what is the beauty itself? What is the cause of this and this to be beautiful? What is the principle that gives beauty to this and this? And in philosophy, we recognize that as the idea or the ousia. What is the particular ousia that these beautiful things share in to give it its level of beauty? And this person is more beautiful than that painting to the extent that she partakes more in the idea or aspect of being called beauty itself, self-beauty. So this is what we've been doing for beauty. That's the argument we did for sticks and equality. This is literally what philosophy is, different from the non-philosophers, lovers of opinion, lovers who are people who claim to be philosophers but reject the metaphysical, reject the logos to do this movement to the metaphysical, and then finally, those two things together reject the art, the artful use of how to go from particulars to the realm of being artfully to benefit oneself and others. So this is our world. If you do a philosophy course, they're gonna reject those three things in principle. Not always, but pretty much always. And we understand why, because after Socrates, the Romans came in and they didn't have the word "the," so they couldn't look for the cause or the principle. They could only look for a example. Also, they wanted to enslave based on faith, so there was no understanding. You just had to believe, and there was no. If there was a God, you couldn't get there. How dare you? Put you to death. Using violence under the false understanding that somehow inflicting bad will make you learn better. That's the Inquisition. I'm going to torture you to make you closer to Jesus or whatever. That's not true. You don't, because of that, what we just went through, it's the introduction of the cause that makes the thing more beautiful. If you want someone to be more divine, as apparently the sadists who use religion to justify their sadism are saying, oh no, we're doing God's work. Well, you should be introducing the good, the just, the beautiful to make people, not through violence or torture or genocide. You name it. Flick through the pages of human history. They're using a fundamental misunderstanding of this argument for the immortality of the soul. So, it's important that we're not just following the argument for the immortality of the soul, we have to understand its principle. So we can also understand, hey, people who say physical things are made better, people are made better through punishment or suffering or that kind of thing. And therefore, we can justify violence as making them better through punishment. Therefore, violence is needed for mass oppression and tyranny. So really, that's what they're motivated for, tyranny, and they need violence, which they need to justify through introducing the opposite, introducing the bad to make something good. In principle, that's false. Which was the principle for this argument. We need to know the principle. So whenever anybody comes along and says, I think we can make the world better by introducing this nuclear Armageddon, right? Sound very like, yeah, Armageddon, literally. And there are a lot of people in charge who believe this principle, that if we make the world so terrible, the world faces Armageddon, Jesus will come back, the second coming. So we need to create instability in the world, create hatred and fear and poverty and genocide so that the world will be made better somehow. Yeah. Pick a religion, pick an Abrahamic religion. What's happening in Palestine right now? Okay, but if we understand the cause or the principle or the pattern behind it through understanding or logos, so we can say, hey, this section here, we could say, let's delete that. This section here, maybe we could say is logos or dianoia, to reach the principle, which might be nous or being. We could apply it to that. In other words, let's just pause for a second. So, coming back to this argument here, Socrates is addressing CB's question. How do I know that my soul is immortal, number one, and indestructible? hey, maybe when I die, that's it for my soul. Maybe there is no afterlife. Maybe I'm just worm food. Okay, and even that argument that we've already been through, that we had to exist beforehand to experience beauty itself, to experience equality, so that when we do come into a body and we see an example of beautiful things, we can recognize it. Oh, that's beauty. You've never seen beauty itself as a noun, but you can recognize it as an adjective. How come? Same thing with the sticks. You've seen two equal sticks. You've never physically, through your physical senses, seen equality itself. So we start here. Right. So even if he allows for our soul to exist before we were born, he also wants to say, okay, this can't be our last, like, you have to prove, so you have to know it, get to be at Disneyland and prove it, explain how to get to Disneyland, and explain why Disneyland has to exist, that the soul is not only immortal and lived before we were born, but indestructible. Because, hey, maybe being human wears our soul down. Maybe it's being human is kind of a sickness. Okay, and that's where we are. And so we're saying, hey, you also need to understand the reasoning, because you can't just walk away trusting Socrates. Sure, we have to start somewhere, but we want to understand how he proved the soul was immortal. And likewise, we saw for ourselves, when we understood the steps of his reasoning, that 3 brings with it oddness, and oddness can't exist with evenness. It withdraws or is destroyed. So 3 can never be even. So 3 is uneven, always. So in the realm of being, odd can't be even, equality can't be unequal, greatness can't be smallness. You can't have both aspects at the forefront of being at the same time. But not only that, in our physical world, or things that bring with the ideas, there's no opposite to 3. But so it's not that it runs away from its opposite, it runs away from the opposite it brings with it necessarily. So 3 can't be even, therefore 3 is uneven. So the similar idea is, if the thing that brings life to our body, by definition, is the soul, so there is a good meantime working definition of the soul, it's that which enlivens our body. We've seen a dead carcass before, on TV maybe, if not in real life. We know what a dead body is. Cadaver. Abracadabra. And then abracadabra, the soul comes into it and it has life. So we say it's ensouled, or there is some principle or thing or force that enlivens a body that can be there or cannot be there. So that's what we're calling the soul. There might not be a soul. Maybe it's just an aspect of something greater. But for now, there is something we can point to recognize a living and dead body. So if, like 3 isn't, there is no opposite of the soul, there isn't an anti-soul, like, I don't know, a zombie. No, that would, no, it doesn't, wouldn't work. There's no opposite of a soul, but the soul brings in life, and there's an opposite of life, death. So the soul is life, and that can't exist at the same time as death. Therefore, these 3 dots mean therefore. Therefore, the soul is undeath or immortal. Very simple reasoning, very beautiful and succinct and cool, and we can follow it. And the more we practice it, the better we can make it ours, because this isn't just an opinion or a trust. This has to be something we see for ourselves. Let's make it white. But by understanding the principle, we can apply it to a different example. So not just the immortality of the soul, example 1. Number 2, how about punishment? Why? Because in order for tyranny, for a small group of people to enslave and exploit many, like our world, you need to introduce violence. And how do we justify violence? Let's write it out. So let's give a second example. Second example. In order to enslave, or in order for tyranny or injustice, you need to bring in violence. You need to justify violence. In order to justify violence, you need to bring in the idea of punishment. Punishment is good. To justify it. In order to justify punish being good, justify punishment is good, you have to bring in the idea of it teaches a lesson, learning. Or made better. And so in order to justify this, learning or made better through violence, make a space, through violence, suffering, in order to justify that, so that requires the principle of people made more good through introducing the opposite. Good, happy. The opposite idea. Okay? And we saw this in principle doesn't make sense. So we can say that, by the way, but, so that's a hypothesis that they have and they promote in our world, but the 3 is uneven logos demonstrates that is untrue and inconsistent or discordant with other things, with reasoning and other experiences. Discordant. So what? Well, so we have a simple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps of reasoning, like Socrates, simple steps of reasoning that we can go through to remove violence in the world, to remove the idea of punishment, to remove, therefore, enslavement, tyranny, and injustice. Not a particular instance of tyranny, enslavement, and injustice, but all. Anytime someone says, I want to have slaves, no, because of this. I want to enslave a race. I want to tyrannize people. I want to have all of the stuff and all of the power over people. Why? Oh, it's okay because they're bad. Every war starts with that. You villainize the enemy. They are, every war, if you've known anybody who's been in the army, they have a really terrible derogatory word for the people they are invading, to dehumanize them. But what does it do? It makes them bad in nature. So it makes them bad. So if they are bad, they have to be made good. They are savages, they are heathens, they are heretics, they are infidels, they are bad in nature, and therefore we need to make them good. And we make them good. So heathen, savage. Like right now, the Palestinians are being called savages and heathens, right? And so we need to make them good. So how do we do that? By let's make this a bit smaller. We need to make them good. And that's by introducing bad. By introducing the opposite. That which is bad. So this is the justification of tyranny. So what Socrates is giving us is not just a solution to a particular war, a particular this equals the justification for oppression, war, oppression. Let's say that better. Justification for war, oppression, tyranny, injustice. So he's giving us not a solution to a particular one. He is giving us a solution to a particular one. Okay? He's not addressing the physical. I mean, he is warning us about what will happen if we don't pick up what he's laying down, learn the art of dianoia, learning the art of the logos. These people who will contradict the logos, the anti-logos people, the haters, they will end up messing with you, and you'll end up with the worst condition of the soul. They will be a cause of the worst condition of your soul. So he is mentioning the causes, but he's really addressing our soul. So he's helping us solve a particular problem. So he's a particular hero, kind of like in a Superman or a Marvel or a DC world. The superhero in that episode solves a particular problem. So he is doing that, but it's a soul problem. We fear the extinction of our soul. But he's also saying, don't just learn this, learn how I do it. Learn the art. Dianoia, my dianoia. So he's also passing on the principle. The principle. So that we can use it to solve all tyranny. This does not just work for the tyranny of fearing our death, which is a kind of tyranny that prevents us from reaching nous, being enlightenment, and doing what we're here to do, and doing philosophy well, and keeps us nailed to our body and our vices. So that is a bad tyranny, perhaps the worst you could say. But all other particular tyrannies, less than this greatest tyranny, it applies to as well, so long as we have the understanding for ourselves. Why? Well, we can recognize all tyranny requires justice. To justify justice, you have to say that punishment is good. To justify punishment is good, you have to say, well, it's good because it's teaching them a lesson, it's learning. They are made better through this introduction of violence or their suffering. That requires the principle to exist as a paradigm that people are made more good or happy by introducing the opposite, that which is bad and makes them sad. But we take that as a hypothesis. We see if it's concordant or discordant with other logos and experiences. Yes, because 3 is uneven. That argument that 3 is uneven demonstrates that it's untrue or discordant. What's that argument? That 3 brings with it the odd, and it can't. It will withdraw. So if we want to make people good and happy, it will withdraw or be destroyed by the introduction of the opposite. As a principle, happiness and good, and like 3, that which brings with it or partakes in it. You introduce smallness, that person is going to be less tall. If you introduce suffering and violence and unhappiness and badness, that person will be less good, happy, vital, in principle. So any school, justice system, political system that is based on this is in principle false. And it does not a matter of how many votes you get. It is a principle. Just like the surgeon does his incision not based on how many votes he gets from the people in the waiting room. We would not allow that. We would demand he be removed from his position. It's because it's true. A truth that anyone can follow. Anyone who's come across this translation of the Phaedo, come across this episode of Awakening Philosophy, anyone who wants to can learn it. Anyone can go through the learning of the art of medicine. You don't have to be born with the right color skin. Nonsense. So too, if that's a particular art, let's push that, let's apply it again. What are we doing? We're turning around and applying the same principle. What is it? Particulars to universal. If anyone can learn the art of medicine, anyone can learn the art of architecture, the right way of building a house, not based on a vote of passers-by, then anyone can learn the art of arts, the principle of arts, philosophy, this. Learn the art of going from particulars to the universal, whether it be medicine, architecture, music, or the nature of soul. Politics, spirituality, you name it. Anyone can play. No one is excluded. You don't need to be rich. I mean, if you are, please support this channel on Patreon. But really, it's open to anyone who has mind and the willingness to reflect on the nature of self. Okay, so Socrates is an individual hero. He's demonstrating his heroicness by solving this great injustice. But also, he's saying you need to learn the principle so you can solve all. And we would say, that this would be a standard for the ideal hero. The ideal hero doesn't just put a band-aid on and then leave. He would address the cause of the problem. He would save all problems by giving us the principle. Okay? So, that's an example. So that's an example of just this one. The immortality of the soul. We've seen that we already immediately benefited. Hopefully we can keep practicing this, repeat it with your friends, talk about it to yourself in the shower, have a coffee, talk about this, see similar patterns in whatever else you're interested in, because we have a very simple way of removing what's necessary for tyranny. Very, very simple. Now we can go further, of course, and say, well, hang on, why? What motivated the people to follow these lies that were untrue, or to believe them because they were convenient? Why do certain people seek injustice and tyranny, seek to enslave? That's a different question. But hey, before we do that, we can cut out the tyranny and the injustice and the enslavement. Cut it out. As principle, the same way, hey, cut out surgeons asking for votes from the waiting room. Just cut it out. In principle, because we can understand it. Dianoia. Understanding a principle. Now, it was a principle that kind of required... I mean, you don't need necessarily the principle of being to show this. The idea that, oh, you know, if you want your friend to be happy, you don't make him more sad and keep flicking him in the ear. That doesn't work. So you don't need being to prove what we just proved about tyranny, but it helps because we are talking about principles that have an existence in being. We're talking about goodness. We're talking about learning. Making better means going towards the good. The good has an opposite that it can't sustain. If learning is remembering, do you help people remember by distracting them from the thing they're trying to remember through introducing pain and suffering? No. So this is why not necessarily, but it's much better, easier, and more accurate to also accept being in nous, because they do have an existence. Learning is remembering, and we can know it. It is verifiable in nous. Let's spell nous properly. It is understandable in dianoia. It does follow the logos that is universal. So we've already seen how much we've benefited, not just for our own fear of death, but solving all human problems. So we are becoming like Socrates, the ideal hero. We've already seen that, the significance of that, for this one particular argument, but now we are moving on to the second particular argument, which is the indestructibility of the soul. Socrates says you need two. So hopefully, if we're lucky, and if the providence smiles upon us, and if the logos is directing us to, and if we can do our best to match Socrates and our level of virtue, integrity, open-mindedness, open-heartedness, and curiosity, then hopefully when we get to this second argument, we will find a similar fantastic benefit that we will get from looking at the principles or applying the dianoia to the dianoia of the second argument. That would be wonderful. So that's a bit of a cliffhanger teaser for the next argument. But hang on a second. The whole time we have been following a pattern that 2 is enough to establish a pattern. In other words, if we can do it for this as well, then we've got 2 particulars of this, and we might be able to not just benefit from understanding the principles behind that, the same way we did for this, but understand the principle of this principle. Because 2 is enough to establish a pattern. We might understand, hey, these steps that Socrates went to in outlining it, and the steps that we went to understanding it, and the benefit we got from it, and the benefit he bestowed by following the structure that applies to this, and this must have, what do? You go from the 2 examples to the, you go from the examples to the noun, must have a principle. There must be a principle behind how he reasoned, how he structured, how he shared it. And there must be a principle of how we listened, how we read, how we understood it for ourselves, such that he was able to pass on benefit. What's that called when you benefit the subject? Art. A hero. So there's a principle that doesn't just apply to the immortality of the soul and the indestructibility of the soul. It could apply to the hyparxis of the soul. It could apply to the brilliant light of being nature of the soul. It could apply to the beauty of the soul. It could apply to the ultimate justice of the soul. All of those things that have but all of those particular ousias in being, we could apply it to all of them, because we are learning the art ourselves. Not only that, but hey, that's just all of the particulars of the soul. Let's go into being or beauty or justice or goodness or equality or the self. That would be the highest movement. Afterwards, after we get this, we could apply it to different adjectives of the soul, different aspects of the soul. We could apply it to not just the soul, but to beauty or justice. Hey, after we've applied it to the soul and beauty, let's say, that's two examples. We could derive the principle and then unlock the deeper question that's hidden in the word altos, hidden in that triad skill tree we've been developing. This guy here, which is what? There is a realm of becoming, which the particulars are in. There is a realm of being that the cause is in being, but there is the hyparxis of the one self. So if we are able to develop this pattern from these two arguments, and then ourselves apply it to not just the soul, but to another example, example 1, example 2, beauty. Maybe let's do justice 2, just for fun. That's enough for a pattern. We could go from that to following the same principle to the soul itself, beauty itself, justice itself, the self. Go from the realm of being, using that method of dianoia that took us to the realm of being. We can take that with us to go from the realm of being, applying it there, to go to the one self. Therefore making it a complete spiritual tradition, therefore giving us more of an understanding, dianoia, of why Socrates said this is the one true mystical or spiritual tradition. We don't just trust him. We have to start by trusting him to have it as a question. It might be that his question is he's wrong. But we needed it as a question to see whether or not it was wrong. And we are seeing more of why it must be so. Because if we jump into being through meditation or through drugs or through chanting or through other breath work or whatever, we're not bringing with us the pattern of establishing patterns in dianoia, going from particulars to a higher dimension, from A's to thus, from becoming to being. If we're not learning this skill or art that can benefit us, when we do reach enlightenment, when we do reach being, like other spiritual traditions have their different yogas, we are not taking with us an art to go from being to that which is higher. In fact, we need the dianoia and the logos to even realize that this oneness experience that is experienced in Buddhist or Taoist enlightenment, or you name it, it's a oneness and is taken as an ultimate. There is nothing greater. Of course, it's the greatest experience. But if you have logos and dianoia, like we have been doing, you have been developing a practice, a habit, a virtue of distinguishing the key terms within something profound, like the Phaedo. The structure of something profound and might be the greatest thing, like the Phaedo. The patterns, the repetitions and themes of something amazing like the Phaedo. So when you reach something amazing in being, like oneness or the enlightenment experience, you're taking this pattern or habit, discipline, practice, worth repeating lots, from our study, from this, our art of dianoia or art of logos, so that when you experience something equally or even more profound than the Phaedo, or amazing or ultimate than the Phaedo, the experience of enlightenment, you can apply it to it the same way we've been applying it to the Phaedo and Socrates' arguments. Therefore, allowing us to go beyond what other spiritual traditions call enlightenment, to the pattern, or to the cause or principle of even that. something that you will not be able to deduce from the experience itself because it's an ultimate experience. But if you have a background in this, which we call the virtues, what are the virtues? Desiring, honoring, and reasoning with the art of the logos, the art of dianoia, which is a habitual thing, until you can have experience of being and it becomes a ultimate virtue of phronesis. One which is immortal and doesn't lose its power. Oh, a handy one to have while you're in this realm. So this brings us back to one of the questions we mentioned earlier in this episode. Hey, Socrates is saying, hey, philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying, but it doesn't stop when you separate yourself from the body. So maybe there's something more you have to do. Collect yourself together, practice it, both now and the future, self by self. That sounds like dialectic language. There might be some activity you bring with you, and he says, hey, you can do philosophy better out of the body. Because even if you have time away from, eating and sleeping and going to the bathroom to do philosophy, making money, surviving, paying your landlord, and even if you do have enough time to do philosophy, it can come clamoring in and drive you out of your mind. Thus is the imprisonment of our physical body to our soul or psyche or mind. We'll say soul for now. Therefore, if you can free yourself from that, what can you do better? Philosophy. But that we didn't know what that meant. He wasn't specific. He left it open as a puzzle that we had to be interested in. We had to develop into a question. And if we did, when we came to this much, much later, like 50% further through the text, we would realize, hang on a second, this going from particulars to the universal by establishing a pattern and then applying it to the next level of cause will allow us to go from being out of our body to a higher realm even than that. In other words, we needed to first be puzzled and not have an answer, but have a question, so that now it pays off. And by the way, that question of what do you do out of the body also comes along with the question of why is this the one true spiritual tradition? Comes along with the question of what the hell is phronesis? Comes along with what the hell, how do we understand the virtues really? All of these questions build together to an ultimate question that can pay off here. Oh, now I get why it's the ultimate spiritual tradition, because without dianoia as your method, philosophy as the method, the art of dianoia, the art of the logos, you won't be able to go from being to that which is the cause of being. The same way, if you don't go from a lover of learning to a lover of wisdom, which is about being, you can't move out of the physical world. And that's how we started. Socrates says, nobody around was giving me a good answer about causes. They were all stuck in the physical world. We need to transition from this world to a higher one. How do we do it? Looking at causes. That's what we're doing here. Socrates is giving us his personal account of how he moved to causes, and he says, you need to pull from my personal anecdote all of the key terms, principles, patterns, and pull it together and use it yourself. I'm just giving you my anecdote of how I went to causes. The closest was Anaxagoras, who talked about them being a mind, but he didn't do very well. But I was able to, through an examination of causes, reach being. I'm going to show you how I did it. By the way, what happened to that? Because he dropped that and started talking about the immortality of the soul. He started focusing on Cebes' argument in a dialogue with him. I thought he was outlining his second search for causes, taking him from the physical world of particulars, A's, to thes, the cause of beautiful things, equal things, just things, good things, learning. What happened? Did he drop the ball? Or maybe he is hiding in this argument the particular things he went through on his own, because there weren't teachers of this around, to go from particulars to the principle or cause. But he's not saying it literally, he's demonstrating it through two divisions, giving us enough to establish a pattern, giving us enough to figure out what was his dianoia, what was the pattern or structure that led him from physical examples to causes. Because he's not going back into his childhood anymore. He said he would, to give his second search for causes. It must be woven into what he's doing, which might give more reason why he said, you need to pull out from what I'm going to say, the principle yourself. You can't just trust me. You have to develop the art of the dianoia. You have to dianoia it. Again, justifying what we're doing, confirming, giving us a thumbs up that we're on the right track. And by the way, we didn't know this until we got here. So it's okay to be puzzled to begin with. So, next time, we're going to go through the particulars of this one, see if it was convincing, see if we can find a pattern in it. And then we got 2 patterns. Let's see if we can find a pattern of all patterns. And then maybe that'll give us what we need to do our own. Maybe someone in chat will have a question about something and we can apply it. And then maybe we can take that as a principle to even go beyond being to the self. The ultimate. And if there's going to be an ultimate hero that we are wondering if Socrates can meet, that Socrates might be setting himself up for in his swan song, then it should be. Not just passing on his power, but allowing us to reach our destiny. So let's see if we can do that next time. So, a little bit of a teaser for next time, and a bombshell, because hey, we've gone a long way to solving injustice of our world in principle, but specifically for our soul. How do we reach that? And secondarily, leave behind something that will benefit everybody else in principle. And what is that thing we are developing that benefits? The art of dianoia. Let's see if we can do that next time. It sound exciting? I think so. So in that teaser, that cliffhanger, thank you for joining me. Feel free to join live in chat on Twitch. There should be a link below. Feel free to support on Patreon if you think this is worth sharing and worth sustaining and you have the means to. I'd very much appreciate it. And feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube too. Again, Socrates is saying, hey, it's very rare for people to be into this kind of thing. But I suppose the more it's liked and shared, the more the wider net we're going to cast to get those few rare fishies out there into a good game, into a game that can benefit their soul and maybe ultimately benefit the human race too, which is what Socrates is trying to do and the standard for him, if he is the ultimate hero. And this is the ultimate hero story. It might be. Hey, and this is the time when we can awaken it. This is a time where we can judge, because we're lucky enough to have these translations and the Greek and be able to read and have the technology to share it. So one way we have the technology to end humanity, if this keeps up, this anti-logos keeps up, but we will also have the technology to share this, the logos. So maybe there's a hidden justice behind these examples of the particulars. Let's keep that as a question as we move forward, because that's a bigger one. That's one we want to see for ourselves. Is there an ultimate justice beyond the particulars that we can see and do our part to share in? On that note, I hope to see you next time. Thank you so much.